Altruism, in Ayn Rand's view, does not mean benevolence, goodwill to humanity, generosity towards others, helping your friends, helping other people when appropriate. She does not mean benevolence. She does not mean kindness. Those, in fact, are values that altruism makes impossible. Altruism, otherism, literally is its etymological root there, is the doctrine of self-sacrifice. It's this doctrine that an individual has no right to live for his or her own sake. It's the doctrine that people have to give up, sacrifice, against their own interests, die if necessary. Altruism must be grounded on irrationality. It can only be grounded in irrationality because its motive is not reality, but its motive is to control and rule people, power here on earth. And that is, of course, the necessary moral framework for dictatorship and tyranny. You must be willing to be a pawn. In order for the king to control his population, to put it on the simplest level, he cannot repair to reason or fact. His absolute rule cannot be justified in reason. To control people through morality, to control people through law in the altruist collectivist way that rulers have always wanted to control people, you need mysticism. There needs to be this alliance between the dictator and the mystic. Ayn Rand observes repeatedly that where there's someone demanding, an ethicist, a philosopher over here, demanding self-sacrifice, there is over here someone, usually a politician, someone demanding, collecting those sacrifices. Hitler was perhaps the clearest about this. The individual must sacrifice his or her interests for the good of the Aryan race or for the German fatherland. And that's what they're doing. They're literally sacrificing themselves as individuals completely for that. Or communism said the same basic thing in a more elaborate and indirect way. The individual must sacrifice for the impossible to achieve future in which everyone will be an Einstein and a Shakespeare in Marx's view, and the state will somehow magically wither away after a dictatorship of the proletariat. So in both cases, what you have is a mystical commitment to collectivist solutions that requires a doctrine, a moral doctrine of self-sacrifice. Altruism is not kindness or benevolence at all. In fact, it necessitates the opposite. It necessitates squashing the individual. It necessitates sacrifice, often on the scale of tens of millions of people being starved or slaughtered. The intellectuals are trying to preserve as sort of an emotional commitment the ethics of altruism and self-sacrifice. It's that ethics which is the necessary basis for collectivism. If people are going to have their personal interests squashed by the state for the interest of some greater good or some future of tomorrow, they need these collectivist alternatives to be based on a doctrine of self-sacrifice. And as Ayn Rand has long observed, there has never been a rational justification for altruism. Altruism's justifications inevitably, necessarily rest on some form of mysticism, whether it's religious mysticism or a more secularized version of mysticism like communism's polylogism or something. And so altruism necessarily rests on irrationality, and it's the policy implications that these people are emotionally committed to, often whether on the right or the left. But it's altruism that they don't want to question. Since the Renaissance, one could see religion as having been in slow retreat and reason gaining steam. By the Enlightenment, arguments for God had been shattered by philosophers like David Hume and could not be taken seriously anymore. But it continued to persist. Why does religion continue to persist, despite the obvious lack of reason behind religion? In the middle of the 20th century, collectivist ideas such as communism, fascism, socialism, racism were under severe attack. And this crisis in collectivism didn't cause people to go back and say, hey, let's question collectivism. The root of the problem here is altruism. Submit to the evildoer, love your enemy, turn the other cheek. That is sanctioning of evil. Altruism necessarily leads to these collectivist consequences. So it's the putting it all together that we need to do with philosophy. We need to defend reason so that we can defend the right of an individual to live his or her own life, and that implies the end of political tyranny as such.